Story 1. When I was in high school, we had a firefighter explorer program where we could go and do OJT shadowing at a few of the local departments. One all volunteer department let some of us juniors and seniors respond to specific calls to do minor light work, hold stop signs, carry the ladders, fetch tools, etc., and allowed us to have a code to their cipher lock. They gave the code to the four local kids so we could get there and unlock the doors and open the bays and get trucks started and ready to roll. One night, the class idiot decided to go into their department and play pranks on them. Took all their hoses off the trucks, strung them around the bays, and looped them through the axles, discharged all of the foam out of the main engine, and screwed with everyone's bunker gear by swapping boots and removing the liners of structural gear, among other things. Naturally, it ended very badly when a call came in for a structure fire, and when the actual firefighters showed up, the entire house was in such disarray, and no truck could even leave. They ended up calling a town 20 minutes away to respond. 2 people died in the fire. Naturally, all 4 of us were the top suspects, and it didn't take the police long to figure it out, as the place was full of surveillance cameras. He was arrested, his parents got the bill for all the damages, and we never saw him nor his family again after that. They just skipped the area and vanished overnight. The fire department killed almost all ties with the Explorer program and allowed us to respond to minor calls. I went on to get certified as a firefighter and spent 5 awesome years with him, where I still seasonally volunteer during wildlife season as a firefighter. Story 2. We had a student teacher for like 6 months when I was in 6th grade, and towards the end of her time with us, she had to record herself teaching a lesson to the class, then provide the video to her school, as a final exam or something. We had this class clown who had to sit in the back, which happened to be near the camcorder. During the recording, he kept saying things like, "Shh," quiet enough for no one in the class to hear, but loud enough to be obvious on the recording. The student teacher ended up having to redo the entire video, and we had to sit through the exact same lesson a week later without the class clown present. Story 3. Art class. Teacher leaves. Class clown says, "Dare me to eat this paint?" My buddy and I ignore him. He gets really pushy about eating paint. We tell him to do whatever the hell he wants. He stands on a chair and eats 2 tubes of paint when the teacher walks back in. Gets marched to the nurse. We breathed a sigh of relief that he was gone. Later that day, my buddy and I got called to the principal's office, informed he is at the hospital getting his stomach pumped, and that it's our fault. I had never been in trouble before. Spent 1 hour in isolated detention to see if I wanted to share more. Literally just locked in a tiny room. Got a really long lecture about if I told someone to jump off a bridge and they did it, it would be my fault. I again denied any fault. Got put back in isolation until the end of the day. My parents went nuclear when I got home and told them what happened. Clown showed up the next day just grinning and laughing because he heard we got in trouble. Ah ha 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 ha. Story 4. Dude announced, "Watch this," to his friends at lunchtime, and walked out of City Hall with a grin on his face and an empty suitcase. At that point, I'm guessing. He was wearing a school colors jacket. Shortly thereafter, the fire department rolled up and assisted with the evacuations. He'd smoke bombed the hell out of the place. His life after that was not a happy one. Not because of that event though, but because he was f***ing crazy. Story 5. In high school, we had a gym teacher who was maybe a year out from retirement. Really chill guy who really wanted everyone to have fun and improve their health and fitness. Was regarded as the man, and many graduates would return just to check in on him and say hey. He always remembered everyone and was just a good dude. Took no nonsense, but still knew how to have fun and make people feel welcome and included. Well, he and his wife were getting up there in age, and as that tends to go, she fell terribly ill. People rallied around him, raised funds, everything we could do. But there was this one kid who always had to stir up and do his best to be disruptive. Like it was his job. Really thought he was some sort of gangster tough guy. Anyway, during roll call attendance in the beginning of class, he said something smart, and understandably, the teacher was not in the mood. There was a little back and forth, and the kid gets in his face and says something really disrespectful and terrible. Something like, I hope your wife's rots off before she dies, or something. Needless to say, everyone was ready to rush this idiot, but before anyone could even shift a foot under themselves, Teach pops him right in the face. Just a quick jab, the muscle memory of an old boxer. It was glorious. The kid fell on his ass so quickly, and before he could even react, he was swarmed and pulled far away by the rest of the class. At first, the teacher was suspended, and there was talk of him being charged, but literally the entire class testified on his behalf, and it was somehow swept under the rug. The teacher was able to retire early, and the head was suspended. Pretty sure his parents knew how much of a pain he was and deserved the punch. Story 6. The class asshole, even though he considered himself the clown, picked on this kid for years, on and off. And this kid had temper issues. I think maybe home life dealings, that sort of thing, and used to absolutely blow up in the middle of class, either from getting picked on or from stress over assignments and such. And it used to create a spectacle, which, unfortunately, did not help his reputation in school, because kids are all assholes. By high school, he'd started to be able to handle it better. He knew when to step out to collect himself, even when woefully clueless teachers on power trips gave him shit themselves. It was really cool to see some positive growth for him, until him and the original asshole clown had a class together again. One day, asshole decides to pester the kid, get on his nerves like old times, and get under his skin. References one of the kid's past blow-ups from years ago and that they had class together, but only a couple of us were there for that and knew what the reference was. And the dumb tries to explain it and make fun of the kid all over again for it. Kid loses it, lobs his heavy binder at the asshole's head, gets in his face and curses him out, puts him in his place. Oh, but it was so to see this kid lose all composure again, after he'd clearly worked so hard on it. But boy, was it fantastic to see his bully finally get what was coming to him. I don't think the binder connected, and thank goodness our teacher seemed to see right through what was going on. So while I don't know what actually happened disciplinarily, I think the kid finally had our teacher on his side, and the asshole finally learned to keep his shit to himself. Story 7. Middle school in 2006. Kid I knew didn't want to turn in his English essay on Monday, so he wrote bomb threats on a few of the bathroom stalls. We still had school Monday. He still failed the assignment. The EOD unit was at the school all day with bomb-sniffing dogs, and one of the teachers eventually recognized his handwriting. Never saw him again. Story 8. When I was in high school, we were on our way to the zoo for an excursion, and a friend of mine who was the epitome of a class clown held up a sign to the glass back window of the bus that read, "Bomb on Bus." One or more of the people driving behind the bus called it in, and there was an absolute show evacuating a busload of students onto one of Australia's busiest freeways. I should probably mention that this occurred a few months after the September 11th attacks, when the world was still adjusting to the new normal. Story 9. I have a hard time picking between two. Rub an eraser on a dirty desk for several minutes, disassemble a pen, snort the eraser rubber as if it's drugs or tobacco, and then he spent the next few hours coughing and wheezing. Some folks in our class used to throw wet paper that they'd chewed on against the ceiling quite often. It'd stick on there and look disgusting. The clown wanted to one-up those folks and chewed a giant ball of paper and threw it at the blackboard. The teacher wrote around it and acted as if nothing happened, and then shouted at him after class was over. Needless to say, he didn't turn out particularly well after high school. Story 10. The class clown at my middle school saw a kid having a seizure on the ground during recess and started kicking him and throwing dirt on him. We had a whole assembly about it, where he had to get on stage and apologize to the entire school. Story 11. In 7th grade at a public school, our class was on the 2nd floor. The class clown stood up in the middle of class, said, "I can't take it anymore," ran to the back of the classroom, opened the window, and jumped. Teacher screamed, and we all laughed. There was an addition to the building, and the roof was under the window where the class clown was standing with a big grin. The teacher quit shortly after due to this and several other incidents in her class. Story 12. He would flirt with the Spanish teacher, who I'll admit was really attractive. And the flirting in class was always funny since he was genuinely funny. But one day, he just didn't show up to class, and the school's guidance counselor gave us an hour-long lecture about how a student's flirting can be harassing to teachers. And it was heavily implied he groped her. Very disgusting. Story 13. We had this kid who would take the smaller butter packets from the cafeteria and bring them to the fifth period history class. At some point, he would scoop out a glob with his pen and flick the dairy bullet on our history teacher's ass when he walked by. He did this probably 5 or 6 times without getting caught. One day, he f***ed up and scraped the teacher's butt with his pen. The teacher checked his pants and found the butter smear. The kid's eyes got super wide like a true deer in headlights. He had no excuse for why he did this prank. He just kept apologizing like it was an accident. My goodness, who accidentally flicks butter on an old man's ass? I'm pretty sure he never graduated. Not surprisingly. Story 14. In 7th grade, the class clown challenged our English teacher to a sparring wrestling match. The taunting went on for weeks until the teacher finally agreed. Last 10 minutes was spent with the class clown having his ass handed to him. No one was injured, and it was very entertaining. I learned years later the English teacher was active in the reserves, which explained his ability to quickly neutralize the class clown without taking it too far. Story 15. There was an overhead projector in the back of the room. It wasn't plugged into the wall. Tuesdays and Thursdays we had classes that would be 90 minutes because they only met twice a week. Over the course of the 90-minute class, he found this projector, fiddled with the plug, and then eventually cut the cord off the projector. He did this with some sort of metal piece from his desk. Well, one thing led to another, and he ended up stripping out the insulation from the cord. Then I guess it sort of naturally progressed. He figured out that he had bare wire in one hand and a plug on the other. So he plugged it back into the wall and touched a desk. Big flash. Kid said, "Holy shit." Then he touched a girl with it. She was fine, but it shocked her pretty good. Story 16. When I was a senior in high school, there was a guy in my math class whose mother had passed away in 2019. Not exactly sure how she died though. Someone had made fun of his dead mom, and the guy turned around and punched him in the face. The guy was suspended for a few days. I lost my mother in 2017, so I could totally sympathize with the guy. Joking about someone's dead parent is a surefire way to end up with a black eye and a fat lip. Story 17. In college, we had a guy in a philosophy class who was constantly talking trash to the teacher. At one point, he got on about tattoos and told the professor he should go get a tattoo. Without missing a beat, the professor pulls up his sleeve, and he's got a concentration camp number tattooed on his arm, and looks the kid in the face and says, Yeah, I've got all the tattoos I need. The kid went from badass to badass in a nanosecond. Story 18. Dude was caught drawing on desks with permanent markers. Teacher made him get some alcohol spray and paper towels to wipe it off. After getting off all the markers, he started wiping the desk with the alcohol-soaked paper towel and lighting it on fire. He'd wait till the fire disappeared and do it again. After about the third or fourth time, he didn't wait long enough, and when he went to wipe the table again, it lit the paper towel on fire. He ended up throwing the fireball onto the carpet in the middle of the classroom, and the teacher had to grab a fire hose to put it out. Story 19. It was September 11th, 2001, 9/11. The attacks on the World Trade Center had just happened. We were in our first class of the day, and the teacher prefaced talking about it all by asking, "Does anyone know where the World Trade Center is?" The class clown quickly replied with, "On the ground now." A couple of his buddies chuckled a bit, but the rest of us were shocked. The teacher was so pissed off that she physically dragged him to the principal's office. He wound up getting detention. This happened in Ontario, Canada, not far from the New York border. Story 20. I had the most amazing grade 7 teacher, Mrs. Jones. She brought in world news and never hid the truth of things from us. I was an advanced reader at the time, and so she brought me her own copy of The Shining and It, told me to just blank out the swear words I cross. She was dope. I go to grade 8, and Mrs. Jones gets one of those super goofballs who is without a doubt a funny kid, but was always on the verge of going one step too far. Well, one day he decides to grab a couple pencil crayons and jam them in his ear and pretend to lose his balance. He did. Landed right on one of the pencil crayons. Blood f***ing everywhere. Thankfully, he only stabbed deep enough to ruin his hearing in the one ear. Unfortunately, Mrs. Jones never recovered, and I have no idea if she went back to teaching. I guess this whole story is a big allegory for the dangers of oversized classrooms. I think Mrs. Jones had 28 kids in that class by herself. Story 21 was an art class, and our teacher was a Vietnam veteran who flew medical helicopters. All he saw day in and day out was dead or dying soldiers. Class clown threw a ball of paper and yelled "Grenade!" at the teacher. Teacher dove under his desk, frightened. Following week, the clown threw a wad of clay on the ceiling, and that's when the teacher snapped. Teacher grabbed the student by the throat and pinned him to the wall with the student's feet not touching the floor. Teacher looked him in the eye and said, "We used to kill f***s like you," and then yelled at him to get out. Following day, our teacher suddenly retired, and we never saw him again. I never felt bad for the kid. He got what he deserved. Never heard officially what happened to the teacher. Hope the guy keeps his pension. Story 22. When I was in 4th grade, our teacher brought in a bowl of mercury for a science lesson and told us not to touch it. She got called down to the office, and Brad W. immediately went over to the bowl and spilled some of it. He tried to sweep it up, but that broke it up into millions of tiny mercury balls that skittered all over the floor. He got paddled. Story 23. During an IT class, in which we were all given an autobiography writing project, the class clown wrote one about the teacher, Mr. B, instead. The work was posted in the school hall for all to see. It became obvious that Mr. B hadn't checked anyone's work before pinning it up at a parents' evening. Shocked faculty members, parents, and students alike read that Mr. B's previous employment included Grand Dragon of the KKK, and that he'd been fired from a kindergarten. How Mr. B was proud to be registered as a sex offender. His hobbies were listed as cottaging, dogging, stalking, pegging, kids, and voyeurism. Mr. B had a nervous breakdown and wasn't seen for 6 months. The class clown got expelled. Story 24. The kid was flicking his lighter on an underclassman's hair. I think he assumed his lighter was empty and had no chance of actually hurting the kid, but the kid freaked out and notified either his parents or the school staff, and about a day later, the lighter kid got expelled. Outside of this incident, he was an okay guy. Not great with realizing when to stop, though. Another kid with a rather extreme sense of humor decided to make an offhand remark, sarcastically saying something along the lines of, "Just because I'm weird and play a ton of Call of Duty doesn't mean I'm gonna shoot this hole up," or something along those lines. A lot of kids heard, "I'm gonna shoot this hole up," and he was booted almost ASAP. Story 25. Everyone knew how easy it was to get a rise out of my Year 11 math teacher. She was an elderly woman who could not control a class. I mostly just kept my head down to focus on doing the actual work. But one lesson, the rowdier kid started to try and throw things into her coffee mug, and actually got things like pens and an eraser in. At that point, I had a quiet word with the teacher to basically not drink it. I don't make a habit of being a snitch, but I have to draw the line somewhere. Story 26. In grade 9 science class, there were small square sinks bordering the classroom. They had pointed faucets for science reasons. One class, I jammed one end of a rubber Bunsen burner tube on the pointed faucet. I stuck a highlighter in the other end of the tube and turned the water on too low. I checked in on it after a couple of minutes, only to find the rubber hose had expanded to fill the entire sink. It looked like a big translucent balloon filled with sloshing water. I panicked and went to my desk to brace for the inevitable. Time was going very slow until boom, the thing exploded like a bomb. The sound was insane. It knocked down the ceiling tiles, soaked everything and everyone near it. It was chaos for a few minutes, but I just sat quietly on the other side of the room. I let the intrusive thoughts win that day. My bad. Story 1. Dishonesty is my main one. If you can't trust them, then there's no reason to even date them, because you're always going to worry what they're doing when they're not with you. In my circumstance, I've been with my boyfriend for 6 years, and it's been great. When we first started talking seriously, he said he watched a show that I was talking about. We would talk about it, and I didn't know until like 2 or 3 years later that he actually never saw the show, but his sister had, so he would ask her about it. While that was being dishonest, I took it as a white lie, and that he did so because he wanted to talk to me even if it was about something he's never seen. Just a funny story on this, to show this shouldn't be the case all the time. Story 2. Lack of empathy/compassion. This is what killed my 23-year-old marriage. Her lack of compassion and empathy for anyone other than herself was shocking and heartbreaking. It wasn't always like that. It just slowly developed, like Polaroid over time. She's proud of it. Story 3. This sounds dumb, but if she's not into me, I am not interested. If she plays hard to get, I'm done. I'm not playing the games anymore. You'd be surprised how often a woman has said she was into me, but won't do anything at all to act like she actually is. Yeah, that is a weird one. You experience a couple women who make it very clear they're into you, it changes the way you deal with women. I don't like second guessing what we're doing. There are women out there who think playing hard to get is a way to know that a guy cares enough. Well, I'll agree. I don't care enough to chase a woman. Ever. Story 4. Any sort of hard to get, playing games, you need to work for me bullshit. If you're into me, just say so. If you're not into me, just say so. End of fucking story. I think the majority of people are pushing for positive femininity, which should be encouraged but is being hijacked by a bunch of charlatans saying to women that you should all be treated like royalty, and you deserve better, and the man is always wrong. Which I think leads to this crazy game-playing, prodigy-feeling women. You are no different than anyone else. You should be respected and loved as a human being, not just because you're a woman. At least in my experience, this is what I've seen. That, or if they act as if you're there to entertain them. Too many profiles listed as, "I'm bored, entertain me, please be able to hold a conversation." Those types of women I've found are the literal worst at holding a conversation because they are so entirely uninterested in everything and won't engage with you on any topic. They don't do anything. They aren't passionate about anything. They don't ask questions about what you were passionate about. They answer any question you ask with like 1 to 2 word responses. I hate it. I'm not a thing to entertain people. I'm looking for a connection and conversation. If you aren't interested in the slightest, then why did we match and or start this conversation in the first place? Just leave or walk away. Story 5. Inability to acknowledge being wrong. Being able to do that and grow with me as an individual was literally one of the biggest things that led to me falling in love with my current girlfriend. I will never again, ever be in a relationship with a woman who doesn't have that quality, because seeing how much better this relationship has been than any of my previous, I just can't ever go back. Story 6. Social media. I don't want every waking moment of my relationship plastered on Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. I dated one girl for a year who didn't have a smartphone, didn't have internet at her house, and didn't even own a TV. It was surprisingly nice. Honest. When we spent time together, we spent our time together. A lot of people are posting timeless things like honesty and integrity and so on, which are true, but this is a good example of a modern one. When someone becomes obsessed with social media, they inevitably start putting on a show rather than experiencing the world. Special occasions, sure. But if someone is going around asking me to help them get the perfect shot framed for totally mundane things like dinner or a walk or their dog they've had for a while doing totally normal dog things and so on, yeah, that's a no. Story 7. Distant personality. That shit can take a lot out of me. I'm an anxious, avoidant person, and I make clear, conscious efforts daily to ensure my partner doesn't feel the effects of that. Just because my childhood resulted in this type of personality attachment style doesn't make it an excuse to treat my partner poorly. I just need to be honest with my partner, have very good communication, and make a conscious effort to show him love and attention. Sometimes I will forget to show affection for a while, and he'll give me a gentle reminder that he would appreciate a hug or something. I kick myself in the butt and do my best to shower him in affection. It hasn't always been like this to make it work. We've been together for 11 years, and we have had many ups and downs, especially in the area of my attachment style. But me being able to acknowledge and recognize when my anxious avoidant personality may impact our relationship is key, and making efforts to combat it greatly helps us. Story 8. I have had a few women I met online start talking about how supportive I can be for their children before I even met them. Like, if you just shop for a replacement for their non existent dad, I am out. Yeah, I've had this happen as well. I have seen single moms mentioned a few times, and while it's not a deal breaker, my most recent ex being an exception, it mostly is. Most I meet don't want any more kids, and I do it on my own. But mostly, I dated a single mom whose kid became so attached to me that it killed me and her when we broke up. We stayed friends, and she started dating a new guy her daughter didn't like. She was desperate to get us all back together. I had to remove myself from the picture completely. It broke me. I wasn't serious with a woman with kids until my most recent ex. But her father wasn't in the picture, and I'd known her since I was a baby. Story 9. General punctuality, though this is a state with friends too. If you're going to be late, let me know when you know. If you live 30 minutes away and text me when you were leaving 5 minutes before we're due to meet, you knew you were going to be late 25 minutes ago. It's a small thing, I know, but I've known people like that, and I've waited in the cold too often. Story 10. Making fun of someone else's hobbies or putting them down for it. This can also apply to friends as well. All I ask is that you show some interest or curiosity in it. It could be something as simple as asking questions about it. Story 11. Not having any goals other than having fun. My ex just lived to go out every night with her friends. No future there, and an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and her ex-boyfriend after a few drinks one night. That was a clusterfuck of chaos that I am glad to be free from. Story 12. Inconsistent communication style. Just feels like I'm being strung along. Also, don't date single mothers. I'm sure they're nice, and the kids are great, but I'm just not in a place in my life where I'm comfortable with that kind of situation. Story 13. Influencers. Or even worse, a girl who thinks she's an influencer. The obsession with social media is incredibly unhealthy and infects every other aspect of their lives. Story 14. At my age, I'm pretty honest about who I am and what I want. I usually let people know right off the bat that I'm autistic. I can totally understand if that's a deal breaker for somebody else and they don't want to handle it. But I've had some people want to test if I'm actually autistic, or try to help me get over it. Ugh. I won't pursue any further. I can't just not be autistic. Story 15. Well, after a really bad 3.5 year relationship with an NPD woman and taking 5 years to heal from that trauma, then after that, being back in the dating scene and dealing with being led on, ghosted, lied to, and stood up constantly. Dealt with another girl's false accusations and stalking, which resulted in me having to get a restraining order on her. Had another that broke up with me because of my hobbies. Later got back together, and then later stole from a store and laughed it off like it was no big deal. I was so done. I was sick of being mistreated, abused, and taken for granted. I was sick of dishonesty and lies, lack of accountability. All these things were deal breakers. As soon as I stopped giving a shit about women and dating and just gave up entirely, I found the one. I started a new job and met her within the first week of being there. We just celebrated our 2 year anniversary about a month ago. I've been through hell and back, but it all led me to her. And we have a very happy, healthy relationship. She truly treats me well, loves me, supports me, and gives me everything no other woman has. Story 16. Someone who starts off with a list of demands and expectations, or things they don't like, rather than saying what they want or like or expressing themselves so you can get to know them. I've seen this is just a huge red flag for women that are generally just unhappy with life and not fun to be around. Story 17. Height preferences on dating profiles. It's just rude. I can't help being 5'7". I have been this height for ages. I get preferences and stuff, but seeing if you're under 6 foot, don't bother on the regular is a bit of a downer. Also, horses. I went out with a horse and girl, and it was a car crash. I don't blame the actual horses, but horses make girls get a bit weird. If you know, you know. Story 18. For me, when I was dating, it was women who didn't know how to cook or clean. That may seem a bit misogynistic, but I am someone who cooks and cleans and can keep a house. The number of people I would go on dates with that didn't have those skills was a bit baffling to me. How do you feed yourself? Is it takeout every night? I wouldn't expect a potential partner to be unable to do household things that I do, nor one that was unwilling to share the burden of keeping a place together. Story 19. Honestly, anything to the effect of men are trash or I hate that I'm attracted to men in their dating profile. Like, I get it. A lot of women have had a lot of really bad experiences with men. And at the same time, I'm not here to fix anyone. And I really hate being treated like one of the good ones. If you really hate men to the extent that you need to declare it on your dating profile, you should probably be working that out with a therapist. Story 20. I am a teacher. I worked very hard to become a teacher, and I earn a lot less as a teacher than my potential. I'm a licensed thermodynamic engineer with a master's. I do the job I do because I was let down at every turn by the school system, and I want to be the person who never lets a kid down and never tells a neurodiverse kid to be more realistic. I do it out of love for my students and a sense of duty to do my best by them. So many people I date can't seem to understand why I would give up being wealthy to do it. Even after I explain my rationale, they just seem so obsessed with getting as much money as possible. I cannot get past that. Story 21. Having a guy best friend who is flirty. The kind of girl who keeps this best friend as a backup or hookup instead of being a platonic friend. And stay away from any female who says something along the lines of, I don't have any female friends because female friends are backstabby, etc. It's a canon event, and every guy should go through this at least once. Story 22. A lack of mental health awareness, for lack of a better term. I am not a mental health specialist, and I cannot be your therapist. If you have issues and are actively working on them, very different than just expecting me to be the one to fix them. Story 23. Just dating in general. Trying to find the will to date or trying to date in this day and age is just non-existent. I look around at friends and family who are dating and see how unhappy they are in their current relationships and dating lives. And it's not making me enthusiastic enough to even try it. I know I'm not a very attractive guy, and so that plays a part in the reluctance. But between reading shit online and what's happening to those around me, it's like, well, I guess I'm gonna die alone. Story 24. After 4 decades and dozens of failed relationships, this is easy. If she tries to change you into someone she wants instead of accepting you for who you are. Your partner should inspire you to be a better version of yourself, not dress you up to be someone you're not. This also goes for setting rules on how you can eat, walk, dress, drive, who you can talk to, be friends with, etc. Any interrogation about your wages, earning, wealth, stocks, or material possessions. Being self-made, having money, and being financially stable are important, but passing your W-2 across the dinner table on first dates should never happen. If she even asks, show her the door. Communication. It's important. I don't care if it's text, call, smoke signals, or kodo drums. Let's make sure we prioritize each other and stay connected, communicating. Don't hole up and brood over something that bothers you. Let's take a hike and talk about it. Likewise for ghosting. If we're going back and forth and having a conversation over text, and you suddenly disappear for hours or days, major red flags. If you have to go and can't reply for a while, just drop a text saying so. If you come to the table empty handed with just a list of what you want from me, instead of coming to the table with a list of your best qualities and attributes, that's how you're leaving the table. Empty handed. BPD, bipolar, or significant history of eating disorders. I've had this trifecta more than once, and even had this in a single person. It's not for me, and it's incompatible with my lifestyle, so they can move on. Hard pass. Story 25. When you ask them what they do for fun and their response is they smoke weed. I'm not a prude. If you smoke weed at parties or whatever, it's whatevs. But when someone says smoking weed is the thing they do for fun, like it's their hobby, it's like every guy jacks off, but if someone told me jacking off is their hobby, it's like you are way too invested in something that maybe it's fun, but like it's not that fun. Like drinking beers is normal, but saying drinking beers is my hobby is fucking weird. Story 26. As soon as I see a double standard, I'm out. You cancel or flake 2 or 3 times. We're supposed to just be okay with it. I say once I already have plans on a certain day, and now I'm an asshole that doesn't put her first. Her having guy friends is fine, and even if they're flirty, I'm insecure for even mentioning it. But I have tons of girlfriends, and it means I'm cheating or a slut. These people are insecure and controlling. They want a slave, not a companion. Story 27. Trust is key. Without trust, there's no basis for a relationship, not even as friends. Trust is very sacred. It takes a long time to build and only seconds to lose. Once trust is lost, it can never be regained. It has to be rebuilt from scratch, but it'll never be as sturdy as it once was. There's a lot of unworthy women running around wondering, where are all of the good men these days? Modern dating isn't even dating. It's a short interview before getting naked. Hookup culture ruined dating. Story 28. I'm not into the we see or pursue others until we are officially in a relationship with one of them culture. It feels like a job interview, and love should not be a job interview. If we are past the first getting to know each other phase, which at most takes a couple of weeks, and still flirting, they should not be flirting with or going after other people. If they do, I take it as either they weren't sincere about their feelings or they're players and not ready for a relationship. Both are deal breakers. Story 1. In 5th grade, I had this teacher who was very gruff. Most of us didn't like her because she was such a hard ass. Like military style, with discipline and homework completion. She wasn't mean, but she wasn't nice either. Then I found out my parents were getting a divorce. I showed up to school one day visibly upset, kinda shaky, and had obviously been crying. She basically grunt rasped, decidedly undecided. Hallway, now. I was so not in the mood to be scolded, and I knew I was a mess. I stomped out into the hallway, and she told me she knew what was going on at home, and asked me if I was okay, then listened to me sob and break down about how I felt. She gave me a hug, and asked if I wanted to spend an hour or so in the library since she knew I loved books, and then I could ground myself. It was so unexpectedly kind. I will never forget it. I found out later she was so gruff and short with us because she's been teaching for a long time, and kids are just mean. She had some sort of health condition that left her in pain most of the time, and she had to use a cane, which caused her to hunch a bit. Over the years, all the meanness of the kids made her a little hard and cold, but she really did care about her students. Story 2. In high school, one of my teachers had this duckbill whistle, literally shaped like a duck's bill, and it made a quacking noise. She used it to get the class's attention. One time, I guess we were being extra rowdy, and she blew the ever-loving crap out of it, and the class went stone dead quiet. She got this shocked look on her face, and then took her hairpin out and dropped it, and the whole class heard it hit the ground, and she got this big grin on her face. And we all just busted out laughing. Story 3. I faked my way through 4th and 5th grade math. I never understood how to do long division, but managed to hide that from the teachers and answer test questions by reverse multiplication. Basically, guess a number and multiply it out and see how close I would get, and keep doing it until I got the answer. My 6th grade math teacher figured out that I was faking, and that I had no idea how to actually divide anything. She had me come in one afternoon to help with cleaning the erasers. All the kids fought for this privilege, so I was thrilled. Sat me down and tutored me until I understood the concept. Bless you, Mrs. Gillespie. Story 4. At my high school, we had an annual week-long science trip, fully paid for by fundraising. Only 4 people were selected to go each year. My sophomore year, I was chosen. I knew there was no way I was going to be allowed to go. I had never been out of the state, never been on a single vacation, never been on a plane, and never been away from home for more than 24 hours. My parents were incredibly conservative and immediately said no. I had a science teacher who didn't accept the no. Instead of just giving up and selecting someone else, he called and tried to convince my parents. When that didn't work, he came to my house and had dinner with my family to convince my dad that I would be an asset and he would be doing me a disservice by not letting me go. He sat at our table and ate my mom's terrible cooking and talked to my parents for over 2 hours until he got a, "We'll think about it." Then he just kept following up. I had never had someone in my corner like that before, who was willing to go to bat for me like that. He wore them down, and it was the best week of my teenage life. I'd never seen the ocean. 20 years later, and I can still recall every detail of that trip. It was a major pivot point for me. Story 5. My physics teacher in high school hosted an annual trip to Walt Disney World in Orlando for 15 to 20 kids for over a week. I was one of the better and most interested students in his class. He was an incredible teacher who found examples in physics everywhere. He also used to work for Disney prior to teaching. Since my family was not so well off and I couldn't afford the trip to Walt Disney World, I declined when he asked me if I was going to join. He probed a bit and somehow found the funds to have me join without me even inquiring. I don't know if he pulled the school money or if there was a surplus, but either way, that was one of the best memories from that school, and I still keep in touch with him 15 years later. Story 6. She outed me for pretending to not speak English to my mom. I am Mexican American, but I am one of those lame border-crossed me ones who was really a Native American, if we're being honest. At any rate, I ignored my kindergarten teacher so much that she assumed I didn't speak English. I had skipped state testing because I had been to 6 to 7 elementary schools as my mom was skipping out on rent. Middle of 1st grade, a random teacher realizes I'm reading library books brought from home in the back and not doing my work. Not common in a special ed classroom. She called my mom and teacher to a meeting, had me tested as gifted, told my mom that I was pretending to not understand my teachers, and told us that in 2nd grade I was going to be in her room. I was in trouble. For the first and last time in school. Looking back, this is such an impactful memory. She was the only teacher who cared about me at all. When they opened my backpack at the meeting, I had it packed with random books. I had encyclopedias from my grandparents' house, stuff from 3 school libraries, magazines, etc. Mrs. Judah changed my life because she cared enough to ask the librarian what language I spoke to help me pick more age-appropriate books. I was reading a high school level novel because the school had just been converted from K to 12. It turns out high school books were appropriate for me. Not age appropriate, but reading level. I love her and will never forget the stash of books she kept for me when they converted the library for K to 5. Story 7. The professor I had for my Calculus 100 class in university was awesome. He was a good teacher and funny and engaging. It was a first-year class with over 100 people in it. I was just a face in a big crowd. I was on campus after hours a couple years after I graduated. They run programs for kids in the evenings and were dropping off my oldest. And I saw him. He stopped, looked at me hard, and said my first and last name, and then said, "Not a bad student. Not great, but definitely not bad," and kept walking. This was a good 6 years after I graduated. Absolutely amazed he would have remembered me at all after teaching how many hundreds of students in between. That is just crazy. I had the opposite with my high school band director. When I was a senior in high school, I was walking down the hall with two of my friends who were also in band. At this point, I had been in band with this teacher for almost 4 years, saw him every day, and had one-on-one auditions and regular individual performance exams with him. He saw us walking by and greeted us. "Hey, John. Hey, Jennifer. Hey," drawing a complete blank on my name. I didn't take it too personally because he was really nice, but he was one of those people who was really focused on the music, to the exclusion of everything else, and was kind of flaky. I would not be surprised if he identified us all in his head by our instruments and the sound of our playing first, and faces and names a distant second. Story 8. Told me I was smart and could succeed. I had spent the past couple of years at a private school, trying so hard to prove myself. Despite doing well academically, I didn't quite fit their cookie-cutter mold, so I was looked down on by other students and administration. When I told the guidance counselor that I wanted to be pre-med and go to medical school after college, she pretty much told me to lower my expectations because I would not succeed. At the end of my college math class my senior year of high school, I ended up in my professor's office to look at what I had missed on my final. He told me that I had done well and that I could get my PhD in math if I wanted. That was not what I wanted to do, but when I told him I wanted to be pre-med, he looked at me and said, "You're going to do well in that. I know you'll succeed." 6 years later, and I'm halfway through my second year of medical school, and his words still ring in my mind. Story 9. Had the police come to the school because he had reason to believe I was smoking cigarettes and using drugs in 7th grade. No, both of my parents smoked in the house. I didn't even know I smelled like cigarettes until the police told me why they were searching my backpack, desk, and locker. Story 10. When I was in 7th grade, there was a teacher at my school that was essentially a love child of Santa and an elf. Dude was 5'2", over 300 pounds, and had a beard that would put Gimli to shame. My first ever conversation with this man ended with him saying, "Now you go get yourself something to eat, big man." It caught me so off guard, I didn't even realize what he had said until after I walked away. Story 11. My RE teacher tried to keep me behind for no reason. I'm a complete goody two-shoes, and he gave me my first ever detention for asking my friend about what textbook page we were reading after coming to class late following an appointment. The guy tried to make me pick bits of paper and rubber bands off the floor as he watched me do it. I walked out, with zero consequences. Story 12. Not me, but my brother. He had one of those haircuts that was popular in the mid-90s, where you have a long fringe, maybe 5 inches, but skinhead the rest. He was a skateboarder. Anyway, the woodshop teacher decided that the haircut was a health and safety hazard, and swiftly cut his hair in front of the entire class while berating him and giving him a lecture on kids today, etc., etc. My brother was 12 and came home from school crying. My father was less than pleased, and apparently went up to the school and made a right kerfuffle, as he should. My mother was very embarrassed by it all. I'll never forget. Story 13. When I was in 3rd grade, the teacher of my gifted program class, extra class we were pulled from mainstream to do a few hours a week, started berating me over raising my hand too quickly to answer questions, saying I needed to think longer and give others the chance to answer. She went on and on about how I had an attitude. I got upset, and she made me stand in front of the class when I started to cry. I know you're crying, and I don't care. It was my birthday, too. It was a class of about 8 students. One guy told me in high school that day was one of his clearest memories from elementary school. One of my most vivid memories of high school is an old English teacher mocking a fellow student's nervous stammer as she did her presentation in front of the class. When the student started crying, that teacher mocked her crying, then failed her for not completing the presentation because she was crying. We used to joke that we hoped that an old dried-up piece of crap like her would drop dead in front of the class. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I hope your subsequent birthdays have rocked. Story 14. Oh boy. Grade 3, I said, "Aw, crap," when I got tagged out, rounding second during a game of soccer baseball. Canadian term for kickball. A little girl covering the base screamed, "Teacher, negotiation fair said the C word." So I got put in detention and yelled at for the rest of the day until I finally snapped on my teacher at the end of the day and said, "Listen, teacher, I don't get it at all. All I said was aw crap when she caught the ball, and I didn't even know that that was a swear word." The teacher replied, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you said the other C word." I said, "What is the other C word?" She said, "Ask your mother." At the end of the day, I got into the van and told my mom what happened. She broke out laughing her ass off and explained to me when I asked that the word the teacher thought I had said was. I went to school the next day and said it to all my friends. Hey, guys, guess what word I just learned? Story 15. Senior year of high school. I was on the wrestling team, and I had cut about 30 pounds that year, from 170 down to 140. I happened to have the same math teacher 3 years in a row, so we really got to know each other. First name basis and all that. She knew how much weight I cut for the season. I told her, and it was obvious just from my face. I wasn't fat before my cut either. I had a six-pack. She had a strict no eating in class policy. That'll be important in a minute. The day after the wrestling season ends, I walk into math class and sit down. She walks over to my desk and puts a whole apple pie right in front of me. She knew it was my favorite, handed me a fork, and she said she'll ignore the no eating rule for one day. I finished that whole pie in maybe 30 minutes. Linda, I will never forget that. You absolutely made my day. Story 16. I have always loved learning and loved going to school. I was a good kid and never really got into trouble. One year, my parents got called in for a parent-teacher conference. One by one, each of my teachers told my parents that I acted out during class, was a distraction, etc. This came as a surprise to my parents, as I had never gotten in trouble, and my grades were always good. Finally, the conversation got to my history teacher and my science teacher. They were speechless. My history teacher told my parents that he wished he had a classroom full of students with a passion for learning like me, and that if the other teachers put in as much effort into teaching as I did into learning, then there would not be an issue. My science teacher agreed and apologized for wasting my parents' time. The rest of the school year was interesting. I could tell there was tension between certain groups of my teachers. My history teacher would later become the principal of that school, and I could not think of anyone more deserving of that role. Story 17. Freshman English teacher in college. He had a last name with 2 capital letters in it, so something like McConnor. On the top of one of my first papers, I wrote McConnor with 2 lowercase c's, and he told me that I spelt his name incorrectly. Now, obviously, this confused me because the spelling was indeed correct, and it took a few minutes of back and forth confusion before he told me what I did wrong. Like a typical 18-year-old, I just kind of shrugged it off, like, who cares? His response was essentially, if you don't care enough about your writing to get it correct, why the hell should somebody else care enough to read it? The response hit pretty close to home. Not initially, of course, because I was an 18-year-old, but now, 15 years later, I still think about it from time to time, and it does force me to put more of an effort into many of the things that I do. Story 18. My computer science teacher would belittle me in front of the other students and even asked me why I showed up for class. I hated his class and slowly just stopped doing the work and failed the class because he made me believe I was dumb and incapable. I'm currently working in an MSCS at a top 10 CS school and have plans to apply for PhD programs in CS next year. Story 19. 5th grade. Teacher was shaking with anger because I put my math problems horizontally instead of vertically, or something really stupid like that. She snapped at me for not being able to follow simple directions and humiliated me. When she went to look at the paper of the boy next to me, he said, "I did it the same way." She smiled fondly and said, "Oh, Robert," as if she was amused. Story 20. I once got expelled for smoking at school when at the time I never even smoked it. I was 13 and started crying, saying that I didn't smoke any weed. Since I was crying, my eyes got red, and then the teacher and principal said, "Just look at how red your eyes are. You're ripped out of your mind." It got me kicked off our championship basketball team and everything. I will never forgive those two for what they did to me and the stress they caused my single mother. Story 21. wasn't so much what she did to or for me as something she did with the entire class. 8th grade language arts class. She was a very cool person. Never looked at you with judgmental eyes, treated everyone the same and with respect and honesty, like we were equals to her. Anyways, the one thing that sticks out more than any other was the very first day of school. She made us all listen to a song. Didn't tell us why. Seemed kind of pointless and lame at the time. Last day of school, we played the same song. Can't even describe how I felt. The school years always seemed to drag on and on. Could never wait for summer. But when she played the song at the end of the year, it kind of brought the whole year together and made it seem like you had just walked in the door for the first time. For the life of me, I wish I could remember what that song was. Story 22. Had a teacher in first grade who was hella superstitious and stuff. One time, she told us if we slept with our feet out from under the blankets, someone would break into our house, cut off our feet, and then leave them on our front porch inside our shoes. It wasn't even near Halloween or anything. She was just saying it like it was actual advice. Scared the crap out of little kid me. Story 23. Guy sitting beside me had his head resting on his stacked fists on the desk, wide awake and paying attention. Teacher was walking up and down aisles, came up behind him and smacked him across the back of the head with the spine of a rather large business studies book while screeching, "Pay attention." I will never forget the hollow thud sound. Poor effer was dazed for hours after. Story 24. My 6th grade teacher made us act out some Greek gods and helpers since we were doing mythology. A girl in my class decided to act out as Hermes. After she was done acting out as the character, the teacher looked her dead in the eye and said, "That was gay. Why didn't you act out as a Greek goddess?" The girl left the class crying. Story 1. My cousin went for a walk once. He was dating this woman who was just an awful human being. She got pregnant, swore it was his, and once the kid was born, the state went after him for child support, as he wasn't on the birth certificate, even though they were living together. Anyways, the paternity test came back showing it wasn't his, and she flipped her lid, just lost it. He asked her to calm down and said he wanted to take a walk to cool off. He left everything he owned, minus the clothes on his back and his wallet, and went for a walk that he never came back from. A few years back, the kid found him. He was 16 or 17, and went on some giant rant about him being a bum and a punk ass and whatever other nonsense. My cousin told him he wasn't his dad. The paternity test showed that. And he had no idea why she told him he was the father and then abandoned them. Kid left a whole hell of a lot more confused than when he showed up, I think. Story 2. I grew up in foster care, and all the homes I lived in either were abusive or run in a business format, collecting cash to house kids. My actual mom was a very heavy drinker and was abusive, hence being in foster care. As adults, we had a very good relationship. She was proud of me, impressed with my work ethic, and amazed that I got fully paid for education via scholarships at the state university. Everything was going swimmingly, until I started to do better than my immediate family. They started to think I had abandoned them, and that I was too good for them once I started pursuing my education. The last conversation I had with my mother and sisters occurred on Thanksgiving 2011, when I drove 3 hours to sit down and have our first legitimate family dinner in several years. I showed up, my mom was drunk, and my sisters were incoherently intoxicated on narcotics. My sisters yelled at me for abandoning the family and called me unforgivable things. My mother said to me, "I hope you achieve all your dreams. Lord knows you've abandoned ours." I got up from dinner and left. I spent the entire drive back for 3 hours hysterically sobbing. I haven't talked with them since. I know it was bitterness and the drugs talking, but it really shattered me to the core. My mother passed away this last year. That dinner was the last time I ever saw her or spoke with her. Both of my sisters were incarcerated at the time, so I flew home to clear out her estate. She didn't have anything but a mountain of bills and a house full of items to sort through. I donated almost all of it to Goodwill. While sifting through her belongings, I did find a lockbox though. The lockbox contained her wedding ring from my late father and some photos of my sisters and I as kids, perfectly preserved. It also had a single note inside, which was addressed to all three of us, with corresponding paragraphs dedicated to us. My paragraph said, "Daniel, words cannot describe how sorry I am for how much I've hurt you. It has eaten at me every day for the last 10 years. I drank because I wish I could have been the mother you deserved. You are the strongest man I have ever met. I'm sorry. You deserve so much more than I gave you. I love you with all my heart. I hope someday you can forgive me. Mom." It destroys me inside to know that Mom died thinking that she didn't mean the world to me. If I'm being honest, I started drinking very heavily after she passed. She died thinking I didn't love her with all my heart. I carry her driver's license in my wallet, above mine, so that every time I take it out, I get to see her. But more importantly, so that she can see me and know that I'm always right here. Anyway, that's my story, Reddit. Thanks for reading. Story 3. I have never left, but my brother has. One morning, 2 years ago, I woke up with a killer hangover. Rolled over in bed, checked my phone, and saw several missed calls and a couple of voicemails from my mother and sister, along with a text message from my dad saying, "Call me." The first voicemail was from my sister, sobbing through the phone. She said, "For the sake of the story, let's call my brother Tom. Tom just tried to commit suicide. He wrote us all a letter and just call me, please." Whoa, this cannot be real. Then my mom's voicemail. "Tom attempted to off himself last night. We haven't been able to reach him, but we suspect he might be heading your way. If you see him, call the police. We need to make sure he's safe." Oh, crap, this is definitely real. We all somewhat suspected depression from him, but this was unexpected. Anyways, I got out of bed and put some clothes on. I open the blinds and I peek out the window, and as if on cue, Tom's crappy old '96 four-door. He was flustered, barely spoke to me, but told me he was leaving for California. Refusing to turn him into the police, I bought him lunch, filled up his gas tank, and then I gave him all of the $26 I had on me and wished him the best of luck. He was back home within 2 weeks, remorseful and embarrassed. I'm glad he's back. Story 4. Mom cornered me in the bathroom after chasing me around the house. Told me to punch her when I tried to leave. Punched me instead. I said I'd call the cops. She said she'd do the same as she's done with my ex-stepdad. Tell him I punched her and it'd be her word versus mine. Next morning, I got into a broken Ford that was still on her name, even though it was mine. I went to get the oil changed. Asked the guy how long he thinks the car could make it. He said I'd be lucky to make it a block. Wouldn't go into reverse, among many other things. All the same, I thought, I'm only going forward. 3 days later, I drove from California to Maryland and spent about 5 years without contact. Reconnected, foolishly thinking people change. People don't change. Last I heard from her, she wanted me to sign over my apartment in Russia so she could sell it and give me the money. I told her I'd happily sign it over, but she didn't need to pretend she'd give me a dime. Like one of the top commenters here, I've also been working since the age of 12, albeit for much less than 8 hours when I started, paper route. Only reconnected because I have sisters, but the brainwashing she's done against me is done. Both sisters are suicidal. One is pregnant at the age of 18, failing grades, and neither will take me up on my offers to help. I make $50 plus an hour tutoring strangers. I'm the pariah who left and traveled the world. But I'm a loser because, well, Story 5. Parents were split and absolutely hated each other and would always put me in the middle. The drugs and alcohol they were both doing didn't help either. Got kicked out of each of their places and went back and forth over some crappy circumstances involving them wanting all of my money to live with them, then playing the guilt card on each other that they took me in while the other kicked me out. Got a steady retail job that I had to work 6 to 7 days a week at odd hours to get full time. 2 weeks before Christmas, Mom said her place wasn't a truck stop and I couldn't come and go at all hours of the night and that I had to leave. Heard similar from her before and didn't want to go to Dad's again, so I called some family and they all refused to take me in because my mom had called and told them I hit her. Since I was still in the same house, I told her she was a horrible person, but an even worse mother, and left. Grandma knew my parents were crazy, so she helped me as much as she could. I still get phone calls, emails, Facebook messages, etc., asking me when I'm going to stop being a bitch so we can be a family again. Haven't seen both since. Invited some friends through Facebook to things that they in turn invited my parents to. Finally nutted up and told them both to get the F out of my life. Mom still leaves me drunk, high, or crying voicemails in the middle of the night, either telling me she loves me or that I'm all that's wrong with her life. Dad sends me emails telling me to get the stick out of my ass because I'm still his son. Still spend time with my grandma. Friends' parents mean more to me than mine ever did. Now I've got a full-time job, an awesome dog, working on doing better in life in general, and trying to move into a place by myself. Blood is not thicker than water. Will never speak to either of them again if I can help it. No regrets. Story 6. I was living with a very mean and controlling girlfriend. If it wasn't her way or all about her, she threw a fit. One day, I had enough and said I was going to the store and just kept driving. I literally drove for 12 hours and showed up at a friend's house 5 states away and asked if I could crash on his couch. I called my boss and said I wanted to quit work. He was pretty cool about it. He knew my girlfriend and actually set me up with a job in my new city. I have never spoken to my ex since. Soon after my relocation, I met my wife, and I could not be in a better relationship. Best thing I ever did. Story 7. Lived in an abusive house with my mom. Got a job after college and in 3 months rented an apartment and went home. Took a garbage bag full of clothes and booked it. She didn't want me to leave because she was talking about all of my money. She would take my car when I didn't pay her my full paycheck. I had to resort to pulling fuses when I parked because she would hide my car on different streets trying to get me fired. Even in college, I had finals to graduate and took my car, and I had no way to get there. Had to rent a car just to take my finals. The stories I could tell. Anyway, I waddled in the apartment with my garbage bag and nothing else, slept on the floor, and for the first time, felt peace. Now I have a decent job, house, wife, and a kid. Story 8. I ran away from my family. My mom and whatever family is attached to. I feel so much better. I resented the bullcrap my mom would pull on me. She once got me pretty screwed around and told everyone I was abusing her and her finances. She told me to my face that she was going to lie and get away with it. And she did. And that was pretty much the family dynamic I was caught up in. When I called her an abuser, she could not handle it. It felt good to leave and not look back. I got a new job, a new place, and changed numbers. Story 9. I was left. My dad and my mom had a fight. My dad left. Then he offed himself. On one hand, I have no memories of him. I was too young. And I am very sympathetic to mental illness and suicidal ideation. I've had bouts of serious depression in my life. On the other hand, his absence, the lack of a dad, left a huge gaping hole in my life. The strangest part is, when I turned the age he was when he offed himself. I'm 36, and I'm older than my dad ever was. And I still feel young, like I have a lot of years ahead of me. I wish I had the opportunity to know him. Everything I know about him is someone else's memory. Story 10. I don't know if this counts, but when I was about 19, I was in a very crappy position. All of my friends were doing meth regularly. I had put out thousands of dollars to bail friends from jail and to try to help them out. The girl I was dating was lying to everyone. She knew about our relationship. My uncle called me in the middle of all of this and offered me a job on the other side of the country. I had my car packed and was headed there within 12 hours. I heard from the girl I was dating about 2 weeks later. She called me crying, telling me she went to my house and I wasn't there and wanted to know where I was. I told her I had moved, and she told me it wasn't my choice to make, that I should have consulted her first. I never heard from any of the people I had considered friends. I heard some of them went to jail, some had kids, and some disappeared. I moved back to the town I left about 5 years later, and everything has been relatively okay since then. Sometimes I see people I used to know, and sometimes they recognize me. But mostly, I keep to myself and spend time with better people than those I left years ago. Story 11. Throwaway for good reason. I've always lived in an abusive home, both mentally and physically, and never saw a proper way out. I started working at 14 years old in a convenience store for $8 an hour, and I hid all of the money I made in a locked container in a nearby wooded park. I did this because my parents would have taken my money if they even knew I was working. By the time I turned 18, I had close to $10,000 saved up and had finished high school. I was supposed to start university that year, but early on in the summer, I waited until my parents went out to work, found and took all of my documents, unrolled out of the university program I was supposed to be in, and left. I took a bus to Alberta, and I've been living here ever since, doing labor. It's been a year and a half, and they haven't even searched for me yet. Not that I'm aware of, at least. How is my life now? I'm poor, barely getting by, but at least I'm living alone and happier than I was before. Story 12. Left my family close to 5 years ago to move to California to start a new life. I was 400 pounds, living a lifestyle of prescription drugs and drinking at 17 with my family. I was good in high school and even went to college early, but wasn't able to secure a loan there to continue past the first year. Dropped my life there and came here. It was very rough for a time, but I'm a lot better now. I had some help from my adoptive father, but paid my way, aside from the ticket here. I live on my own now and manage an office selling printer parts and various other moneymakers online. I started my own business last year and have been paying out of pocket to continue school here because the college I went to back home wouldn't release my transcript. I have lost a great deal of weight and am away from unhealthy addictions. My family is, for the most part, very cross with me. My mother died almost exactly 2 years ago. I had planned to go back for her birthday, tomorrow incidentally, in 2013, but she died 2 weeks prior to it. The only regret I have is leaving that door open. I like to think she'd be proud of where I went. Story 13. My father just walked out on us when I was 9, walked out on everything. Racked up a load of debt before he went without my mother knowing, through a gambling habit he had which we didn't even know about until immediately after, and the hounding from the people and companies he'd borrowed money from. Some of them were the kinds of people you didn't really want to owe money to, and the next few years were kind of rough. To add on to that, my mother got sick around the same time and ended up unable to leave her bed for a few years. I think the illness was caused, or at least exacerbated, by the shock of his leaving. Not going to lie, it was really rough. I ended up getting homeschooling, as they were afraid that he'd show up and pick me up from school one day, and after a little while of that, my confidence was so drained that I avoided school as much as possible. Police were looking for him and eventually found him after a year or two in a town 200 miles away, but he didn't want to get in contact with anyone, and nothing ever came of it. He was an ex-policeman, so I'm guessing he knew what to say, or something like that. Then, a few years later, we got a phone call from a lady who had found his address book, informing us that he had died, and she was looking for his next of kin. It ended with us traveling to where he had been staying, to find an elderly lady he was basically bleeding dry financially. Some of the stories he'd been spinning to manipulate people were incredible. People there thought of him as a hero. He told them about how he'd started a new life after nursing his sick wife with cancer until she passed away. How my brother had been inspired by his story and was working as a doctor abroad, and in his fantasy, I never actually existed. I can't really say I'm angry about it. I grew up afraid that I'd end up just like him. But I think when you're exposed to something like that as a child, you can either see it as an example of how to live, or you can look at it and do everything in your power to avoid becoming it. Story 14. I was 21, in my third year of college, getting drunk and high on pills every single night, puking every single morning. Guy after random guy, had just had an abortion, 98 pounds and barely scraping by in my classes. One day, I woke up and felt so unbelievably sick and tired of the way I was living, I considered ending my life. Instead of offing myself, I packed up as much as I could fit in my car while my housemates were in class or work and moved to North Carolina to live by the beach. I called my parents and told them what I was doing, which broke their hearts, which broke my heart. I still come home for some holidays. I stayed in a cheap, disgusting motel for 2 months before I saved enough money at my waitress job to get an apartment 40 minutes from the beach. I'm currently married to a wonderful man, completely sober, finished my degree, and have a baby due in December. I can truly say that I'm happy. Story 15. I left my abusive husband 7 years ago. I just walked out the door. I never spoke to him again. I had squirreled away money for years because he controlled my income. He had this idea that I was miserable because we didn't have children, so he tried to change that by raping me so I would get pregnant. He had no idea I was using birth control. I had resigned from my job, so I just left. I could not bring children into that life. I went to live with my parents in a different part of the country. Now, I live in a different country. I have a kind and loving partner, and we have a daughter. I'm happy most of the time. My family doesn't tell people where I live in case he finds out. I don't know what happened to him. I hope he's dead. What's going on right now that most people have no idea about? Story 1. The co-director of the Melanoma Institute in Australia and world-leading melanoma pathologist, Professor Richard Scolyer, is fighting a terminal brain cancer glioblastoma. He and his co-director and best friend, Georgina Long, are using the research and knowledge that they have gained through fighting melanomas to find a cure for this currently incurable cancer. He is the first human trial for a cancer vaccine alongside personalized immunotherapy. Pretty amazing that someone with so much knowledge in the area of cancer treatments can fast-track a potential cure for this brain cancer. I hope it goes well for him. Story 2. The greater one-horned rhino population in India and Nepal is growing, as highlighted in the State of the Rhino Report, 2023, by the International Rhino Foundation. The collaboration among India, Bhutan, and Nepal, along with strict government protection and management, has led to an increase in their population over the past decade. The greater one-horned rhino population, which once numbered as low as 100 in the early 1900s, has increased to more than 4,014 now. Story 3. The U.S. healthcare system is actively collapsing. Roughly 15% of U.S. patients simply cannot receive care, and that number is increasing. COVID accelerated it, but it's been coming for a while now. There are tons of causes: cost, patient location, or because of the system being overburdened. Hospital systems are closing entire hospitals because they aren't profitable enough. This creates care deserts, where patients don't have access to medical care. Certain specialties are being targeted by politics, which can make it worse. Hospitals, especially bad ones, are having huge staffing issues. Nurses are leaving bedside nursing at a high rate because patient care sucks. That creates a vicious cycle because then conditions get worse and then even more nurses leave. 35 to 45% of nurses quit nursing entirely within 5 years. But also MDs, CNAs, and support staff like techs, phlebotomists, therapists, etc. leave for the same reason. Hospitals just aren't paying appropriately to be assaulted and hit on and get certifications and have your license be on the line when Target will pay you $2 more an hour. Our insurance system has raised the price of care so high that many patients choose not to seek care at all or can't pursue treatment when they need it. That's a combo of for-profit insurance, providers being able to opt out of Medicare, Medicaid, because they need to be profitable to keep their doors open, and ever-rising cost of treatment itself, medicine, procedures, and facilities. States who opt out of extended Medicaid are the ones who need it most, so tons more low-income patients can't afford care. The resources we do have are being stretched to the breaking point because of better-known issues like people treating ERs as primary care. That's getting worse for the same reasons. Fewer and busier providers, higher costs, worse insurance, and fewer facilities. Story 4. The Ocean Cleanup Initiative has a new system to clean up an area the size of a football field every 5 seconds. The previous one extracted 282,787 kilograms of trash from the Pacific Ocean so far. They're also working on interceptors for rivers that have collected over 840 tons of trash and counting. There's a long way to go, but they have lots of support, and they're making amazing progress. Okay, now back to the bad news. Story 5. There's always cool stuff happening in the science community that doesn't make it to the news, but really should. Check out thegoodnewsnetwork.org to see some neat things. Here are a few highlights. A new stem cell injection that halts the progression of multiple sclerosis is in clinical trials. The California redwoods weathered the wildfires better than scientists expected and are recovering very well. The FDA approved a treatment that cures sickle cell disease. A complete Stegosaurus fossil with skin still intact has been unearthed. NASA has developed technology for sending data transmissions much further than radio frequencies, and recently sent their first transmission 10 million miles away. Scientists are going to start experimenting with lab-grown cooking oils, which could help curb a lot of the environmental damage caused by mass soy, corn, and palm oil farming. Scientists have created natural sponges that can soak up nanoplastics. Story 6. Astronomers here. We are now putting the final touches on the Rubin Observatory, which will see first light, aka start looking at the sky in a year or so. It is an entire 8-meter diameter telescope mirror that will image the entire sky every night visible where it is. It's hard to emphasize what a game changer this will be for astronomy. We will literally catalog all of the asteroids, see millions of supernovae a year, map the Milky Way, maybe even learn about what dark matter and dark energy are. Put it this way. If the James Webb Space Telescope is like boring a hole into one tiny spot on a shutter to let light through, this is going to be like opening an entire window. Story 7. We are experiencing both child and adult literacy crises predating but exacerbated by COVID. I have received some job applications that have made me really shake my head. An adult, 19 to 20 years old, wrote out quite a bit of info about their previous experience and work history. It was almost like gibberish to me, and the other managers, though, didn't make any sense. Until one of us realized that this person must have been unaware of the existence of the word and. Anywhere there should be and, they had written the word in. Once we realized that, it made way more sense. That got me wondering what was going on, though. It was as if this person had never read anything and instead completely sounded out the word and as in. Story 8. This absolute wild story is on CNN today, so maybe some people know about it, but long story short, all those scammers that are stealing people's life savings are actually being held captive as modern-day slaves and are tortured in front of their coworkers if they don't scam certain amounts from people. They specifically target Americans, Brits, and 2 countries from South America that I forget. It was such a terrible story. They live in cheap buildings that look like hotels and spend 16 hours a day scamming people. They have profiles built for them, and they spend all day lying to people and getting them to invest in a fake crypto platform that ultimately gets shut down, and their money's gone forever. The scammers don't get paid and are threatened with death. One of them spoke out in anonymity and said when he initially refused to do the job, they locked him in a cell for 3 days with no food or water, and he finally decided scamming was better than dying. It might sound ludicrous to have sympathy for these people, but some of them, I have no idea how many of course, who steal your money, they talk to you and convince you to give away your life savings. That you curse to hell for what they're doing to you. They don't see a dime of it. And as mad as you want to get at them, they're slaves. If they don't do what they do, they will be tortured and possibly killed. Even when they called the embassy for help, they were told they got themselves into the situation and to get themselves out. Story 9. For those who use or are considering using Depo-Provera birth control, don't do it. Those of us who were on it for years have developed osteoporosis and degenerative disc disease. Supposedly, there is a black box warning, but patients only see the filled injection needle. We never saw the box. And the doctors didn't tell us. So I am 46 with the degenerative spine of a 70-plus-year-old woman. There is no reversal. Story 10. This is really specific. Gunnison Valley, Gunnison, Crested Butte, and Almont, Colorado is where the Gunnison River starts. The Gunnison and the Upper Colorado River join to make the Lower Colorado River, which is an extremely important source of water and power for the western states. The Gunnison provides most of the water to the Lower Colorado, so if we don't get snow in the valley, then Las Vegas and the farmers out west are f***ed. We've barely gotten any snow, and there is 0 in the forecast. If something doesn't change, you all are going to have a rough summer down there. Story 11. Your child's classroom is being completely overrun by 1 or 2 problem children, and your child is hurting because of it. 100% can verify this, and will add that there are several factors at play. COVID-related behaviors, parents used unlimited screens to babysit their kids, and the resulting social development stunting added to 2 years of no school routine. School districts fearful of lawsuits, afraid to stand up to sue happy high-income helicopter parents, and or afraid to be the latest news story and disproportionately suspend and expel poor kids or kids of color. The biggest one, and one that you, yes you, can help with, is that class sizes have increased at least 30% over the last 20 years. So all the normal interventions you could use with problem children are ineffective because there's too many kids in the room and not enough time to spend with each individual kid. You can help this by A. supporting your local teachers when they bargain or strike because class size is a contract and negotiated issue. B. Call your school board and ask what they are doing about using funds to reduce class sizes. C. Support and vote for local legislators who actually know something about education, and not the business people who run for the school boards and think they know more than teachers because they make more money. Story 12. How about the total commercialization of the internet? It started as a wild west of entertainment, news, and information. Now there is daily propaganda and agendas that get consumed en masse. There are entire swaths of commercialized psychologists finding how to squeeze profit from you on almost every single app, game, streaming service, you name it. There are advanced AI being used by corps to lock you in cages of your own design, so comfortable and cozy that you'd be crazy to disconnect or complain. But why would you want to know that you are just a slave to forces beyond comprehension as long as you're here and a slave to your own compulsions? That morality has long fallen by the wayside. We don't even see things like gore or racism as particularly degenerative anymore. We just consume. Story 13. There's a third regional war being threatened, aside from Ukraine and Israel. It's between Venezuela and Guyana, with Venezuela threatening to invade what is essentially the western half of Guyana. There is an old dispute, one Venezuela originally gave up pushing on decades ago. But a few years ago, a shitload of oil was discovered off the coast of western Guyana. And lo and behold, Venezuela is suddenly feeling muscular. The U.S. has already sent a carrier over, sending a not-so-subtle message to Venezuela. You don't have nukes. We don't have to suffer you gladly. That'll probably be the end of it. Probably. Story 14. Maternal death rates in the United States are rising. The highest rates are among black women. The rates have essentially doubled over the last 20 years. Edited to share that there's a lot of moving factors here. The rates are calculated from before birth to a year after birth. People are having babies later in life now, which is one factor. The immediate factors at play are things like hemorrhage, infection, hypertension, preeclampsia, stroke, and cardiomyopathy. But if we consider the factors that are happening up to a year after birth, we look mostly at mental health. The contributing factors to this mental health crisis, like lack of support, shit maternity, paternity leave, living far away from family, increased societal pressures, social media, etc. These mental health factors alone can be why America's rates are higher versus other countries. We aren't supporting our moms. Then there's the contributing political factors surrounding abortions. Story 15. Insects are humans' #1 competitor for food resources, and our agriculture leans heavily on temperatures dropping below freezing at least once per winter to control insect populations, whether they know it or not. But southern states are starting to see years without a freeze, and insect populations are booming. Couple that with hotter summers that hurt our agriculture, and production seasons are struggling. ETA. The other post is referring to urban insects. The information I'm bringing to you here is from a 20K person agricultural conference I just attended, where the main topic was developing technologies to solve the problem of fending off the influx of insects. I didn't make this stuff up. There are literally tens of millions dedicated to solving this problem. Story 16. The largest dam removals in history are happening right now, restoring access that salmon haven't had to their spawning grounds in over a century. The Yurok and other northwestern tribes have put in the work for decades, advocating for waterways. And though some utility companies are really pissed about it, the Biden administration approved millions of dollars to fund the continued efforts. Salmon are keystone species, so many parts of the ecosystem rely on them. So this is amazing news. Story 17. There is a treatment for prostate cancer that uses sound waves to cook only cancer cells. Has no side effects and works as well, if not a lot better, than the old way of surgery and chemotherapy radiation, which has a lot of brutal side effects. You feel fine within a few hours, and by the next day, you can be back doing your thing cancer-free. It's by a company called Profound Medical, and it is the Tulsa procedure, and is available in many clinics in the US and Canada. Story 18. There's a generation of teens constantly smoking fake vapes with pesticides in them that turn into neurotoxins when inhaled. The most common black market brand, which I've seen literally everywhere, tested for 19 different pesticides. I see teenagers chiefing these all the time like it's nothing, and reading about the effects is scary. As someone who used to chief hella fake vapes, I can still feel the brain damage. There's going to be a generation of teens with brain damage and fertility issues because of all the fake they used to smoke. Weed is different today too with vapes. Before, you couldn't smoke anywhere and everywhere because the flower is stanky and you have to roll your shit and light it, etc., etc. Vapes, however, are so discreet and easy to carry, but worst of all, teens stay up on this shit 24/7, as opposed to smoking 2 to 3 times a day. It's a teenager's dream. Discreet, not smelly, hit it quick and put it away. Stay up all day if you like. This is so bad for your brain, especially with neurotoxins in the mix. I don't want to even know what's going to happen with all this shit. Story 19. Multiple cities, one in Alabama, Austin, Texas, and Sacramento, California that I've heard from other Redditors, are trialing a housing-first approach to homelessness. Generally, these are taking the form of tough shed on a trailer type mini homes set up in urban blighted areas. The Sacramento one is at the location of a former mall that was razed and never redeveloped, including POP patrols by the county sheriff's office and country outreach programs in a temporary building on site. While all these programs are currently super small pilots, the Sacramento one is only 100 units, it's a start on providing these people somewhere to go that's reasonably safe and where they won't be criminalized just because they're homeless. POP is problem-oriented policing. It's a policing style that focuses on only major crimes and/or a specific type of crime. Gang violence task forces are a type of POP. In the case of the homeless camps, it's focused on community and trust building with the police, as well as violent crimes and theft. They ignore public intoxication, drug use, and even fair amounts of public indecency. Hey, do that inside and not out here, as opposed to an arrest, as long as it's non-violent. The overall effect is a large decrease in problem behavior and increased trust in the cops to reach out when someone is in actual need. Story 20. New data keeps coming out to support the regenerative agriculture movement. The data shows that we can sequester significantly more carbon and grow significantly more food with fewer chemicals in less space. all while fixing the damage we've done to the environment. It turns out that monoculture, the process of growing one crop across a large field, is actually one of the least efficient ways to grow food. It also leaves plants vulnerable to pests. What we're learning through regenerative agroecology studies is that multiple crops can be grown in one area, increasing both field yield and nutritional value of those foods. The Three Sisters is one commonly known example of companion crop planting, but there are countless others. Companion planting also protects the crops from pests and disease, and water loss too. There's more, but this is Reddit, and I've already gone on long enough. If you're interested in checking my sources, agroecology and regenerative agriculture, Vedana Shiva is just one of many. Story 21. In the US, they're making original Medicare look less appealing than Advantage plans, which are administered by private companies. These companies take billions of tax dollars and limit access to medical care by having small networks and difficult claims processes. Those on original Medicare are forced to buy crappy Part D plans to cover prescriptions. Get this. They stop paying after $4,000 has been spent on medications, and you still have to continue paying the premiums even when they don't pay out anymore. Politicians traded the health of the disabled and elderly for profits. Story 22. Locally, people are protesting the redevelopment of a vacant office building next to a park in an apartment complex because trees will need to be taken down. Meanwhile, a few miles away in the same city, a car dealership just applied to get 5 acres of land rezoned that is currently all natural vegetation, including trees, grass, etc., so that they can turn that land into additional car dealerships. No one seems concerned about the trees there, and they actually have a say in the rezoning process. Unlike the private land this apartment complex will get built on. Story 23. Pakistan is in the process of deporting 1.7 million Afghans that fled there following the Taliban takeover. Nobody seems to give a shit. The Taliban seems to be doing what it does best: oppressing those that are being returned horribly. 450,000 have been forcibly returned like this, in the dead of winter, mostly along the border areas. People look at what is happening in Gaza and think genocide. But what Pakistan is doing is arguably worse. Story 24. Blame lobbyists and politicians for not allowing desalination. I was on a campaign for a while until a couple of billionaires said, "Piss off, you'll kill our revenue." It would have solved California's and most of the coastal states' water issues for usable water, but maybe not the best drinkable water until it's treated a second time. Yeah, it would take a while, but I forget. What's better than zero water? Is it any water? Story 25. They kill 100 million sharks in the middle of the Atlantic and cut off fins and toss them back in alive. This releases a hormone and scares sharks to death. So much of this hormone is realized that sharks have now migrated closer to land. Human attacks are up over 4,000% and will get much worse. Blame Chinese eating a soup that's not even delicious, but only to show off status. Story 26. There's a guy in my hometown who hides thousands of dollars outside of a children's rehab center, then calls the front desk, and they have a little scavenger hunt until they find it. They then use the money to help families buy holiday gifts. No one knows who he is, but over the years, he's given over $100,000. It's usually front page news when the year's donation comes in. Story 27. Dengue vaccine is a vaccine used to prevent dengue fever in humans. Development of dengue vaccines began in the 1920s, but was hindered by the need to create immunity against all 4 dengue serotypes. As of 2023, there are 2 commercially available vaccines, sold under the brand names Dengvaxia and Qdenga. Story 28. The federal government in the US is close to finally legalizing, or at least loosening some of the more drastic restrictions on cannabis. But what you probably don't know is that alcohol and tobacco companies, along with an industry association of convenience stores, are the ones doing the most lobbying on the fine print of how this goes down. As a result, it's quite likely that the resulting changes in law and regulation will give huge advantages to large national companies, while doing nothing for existing local marijuana licensees and ordinary people with past convictions for cannabis. Story 1. My friend is a police officer in Berlin. He and his colleague were sent to an incident of domestic violence. A guy was beating up his wife, and the neighbors called the police. When they arrived at the scene, they found the son of the wife beating up his stepfather, who was trying to fight back but just caught one hit after the other. The son made sure not to hit his stepfather's face, and when asked later, he said, "I didn't want him to drop unconscious. I wanted this to last." Also, that would have been unfair, as he never hit my mother where other people could see her bruises. Story 2. A friend of mine used to be a hash dealer, and for some reason, he spent his money on reptile habitats. Giant glass enclosures connected by tunnels, plant life everywhere, dozens of different reptiles living in a lush green world. When he got busted, cops were calling other cops to come take a look. Some even went to get cameras. This was the 90s. Because they were so blown away by what they were seeing. Of course, they still arrested him, but in the cops' eyes, he had become a cool reptile guy instead of just another dealer they were arresting. Story 3. I had a case in my first year as an officer where a drunk man launched his car off of a boat ramp. We approximated that he was going 50 miles per hour and the car landed in 20 feet of water. Now the cool part. He swam out, ran 8 miles to his uncle's house, and stole his tow truck. He then drove the truck back, swam down, and hooked the tow cable to the axle of the car, and then proceeded to pull the tow truck into the water as well. We were called on scene, and we could only see the headlights and the tip of the hood above water. He was passed out asleep on the dock next to it. Story 4. This reminds me of the story of Tommy Fitzpatrick. In 1956, he stole a small plane from New Jersey for a bet, and then landed it perfectly on the narrow street in front of the bar he had been drinking at in Manhattan. 2 years later, he did it again after someone didn't believe he had done it the first time. I bet the cops that arrested him were very impressed. Hell, he didn't even end up getting that much of a punishment for either crime. The first time ended up being only a $100 fine, since the charges were dropped by the owner of the plane, and the second resulted in only 6 months of jail. Story 5. This one always gets me. In my city, a homeless man was breaking into homes by lockpicking. Nothing unusual with that. However, what he did was brilliant. He would wait until he knew the times people wouldn't be home and would clean their homes for them. He averaged a week or so per home going unnoticed. The first few homes he was never caught, but signs of a home invasion were reported to us. On the house he did get caught in, he used the defense that he was cleaning a home that he was hired to clean, and mistakenly got the house wrong and the door was left open. Armed with nothing but a cell phone, he made fake email correspondence to back his claims from a client with a similar address. He was able to overall, unproven but speculated, stay for upwards of a month in homes. In court, his defense was actually successful in my opinion, because the other cases he couldn't be linked to, and he was only prosecuted for the one. Then with his defense, his lawyer only got him 14 days in jail. Guy never took anything outside of food. He would clean their house, eat, shower, and nap, and then leave. Story 6. Makes me think of Captain Starlight. He was on trial for stealing cattle, but the jury was so impressed with the feat that they found him not guilty. The judge asked the jury to reconsider. The jury came back out and stated, "Not guilty, and he can keep the cattle." Story 7. We used to have this campus police officer that would come chill at the picnic table with us while we smoked the electric lettuce. He said he loved the smell and enjoyed being around us while we were goofy. That, and we weren't drunks destroying everything in our path like the rest of the students. Come to think of it, my college was liberal as hell. This was 12 years ago in Northeast Pennsylvania. Weed was essentially legal on my campus, but they really enforced underage drinking. I want to hear from real cops, though. Story 8. Cops come due to a domestic disturbance. Husband is in altercation with man outside of home. Wife is present. Cops talk to husband who is severely beaten. Cops talk to their wives. Cops talk to a man who turns out to be their friend. The allegation is that the husband may have assaulted the wife, and the friend beat the husband. Husband runs inside and tells the cops to stay out. Works. Cops interviewing friends smirk and laugh when interviewing friends at how severely the husband was beaten. No one was arrested. Story 9. I wouldn't say that this is cool, but I arrested someone for battering his missus. Just before I told him the magic words, he said, "I saw her with 3 other guys. What would you do?" I could not think of anything cool to say, but the way the guy looked at me, I felt so bad for the situation they were both in. It seems that she had issues with drugs and alcohol, and he walked in on her gang. I've seen some of the replies to this and think it's shocking. She had issues, and so did he. Never is it okay to attack your partner. Just be nice to people and hope people are nice to you. I arrested the guy because I had the necessities, duty of care, and I had and wanted to. I wish I could have done more to help them. Story 10. My uncle was a state trooper in Oregon and pulled over a group of downhill skateboarders for speeding in a 40-mile-per-hour zone. Apparently, they were clocked going close to 60 miles per hour down a gradual decline. Apparently, they were even passing most of the cars. He didn't write them a ticket because he was just flat out impressed that their massive didn't slow them down. Pretty legendary. Story 11. Not a cop, but my dad was. He pulled over the local ice cream truck in town because the driver failed to stop at the stop sign. While reviewing his papers, he realizes the guy's license is expired, and his permit to operate the ice cream truck hadn't been renewed yet that summer. Instead of writing him ticket after ticket and essentially ruining this man's yearly income, he gave him 2 weeks to sort it out. The ice cream man got all of his stuff in order, and at the end of the summer, dropped off 4 massive boxes of ice cream to our house as a thank you. Never ate so many screwballs in all my life. Story 12. When I was 14, I smoked, because I was such a badass. Figured my mom didn't know because teenagers are so sneaky. My mom was dating a cop, and on date night she left and jokingly said, "No smoking in the house." Well, a few hours later, I went to the apartment quad for a smoke, and my mom and police boyfriend came home early. She yells, "Are you smoking?" And I was a little bit. I was like, "Yeah, you said don't do it in the house." Her boyfriend was like, "Technically speaking, he has your parental permission to smoke as long as it wasn't inside. So I don't even need to do anything." We did eventually have a talk about the dangers of smoking and blah blah blah, which totally didn't take because I was eventually detained by campus police at 16 for smoking on campus during school hours. Got 30 hours of community service. Story 13. This happened a long time ago. I was a rookie in the early 80s. I was dispatched on a disturbance call, and when I arrived, there was a guy on the ground and a woman was pummeling him with a baseball bat. I ran up and grabbed her, took the bat, and handcuffed her. I called an ambulance for the guy, and the woman was crying and saying, "You don't understand, he raped me last year." I was a little incredulous, but checked it out, and sure enough, he did have an outstanding warrant for. I had dispatch pull up the report, and you guessed it, she was the victim. The EMTs checked him out, and he was very bruised, but not really injured. I took the cuffs off of her and slapped them on him, and told her thank you for the assist on the arrest. He went straight to jail, did not pass go or collect $200. Story 14. Look up the story of the Barefoot Bandit. Basically, a kid who lived in the woods and evaded the FBI for a good long time. He taught himself to fly planes that he stole through trial and error, the error being he crashed. And I think the FBI ultimately hired him after catching him in Florida, after getting there from his home in Washington state. Some of that might be wrong, but I recommend reading the full story. It's a great read. Story 15. I'm not a cop, but I've been let go by the cops a number of times when I was a wild youth. First, there were many times I just walked calmly past the cops busting a house party. They were too busy having fun chasing the kids running or hiding. Another time, I was out joyriding with my friend soon after the 4th of July. We were in a rural area and had some fireworks in the car. We hadn't seen a car for miles, so I had the brilliant idea for Roman candle jousting. I held the candle outside and shot out above and in front of the car, so we would drive through the sparks. It was great watching all the colorful bursts shower over the windshield. We did 2 candles and decided we would do 1 more and be done. The last candle, we passed a dark car on the side of the road for the last round of sparks. Quickly, we realized the car was following us fast, so my friend put the pedal down to get away. I think we got up to 70 before the cops' lights came on, and we realized we were doomed. We pulled over immediately, of course. In the end, the cops confiscated our fireworks and told us we would be receiving civil fines in the mail. Those fines never came. Story 16. My uncle is a police officer. His main job was to find drugs, and one time they pulled over this guy who was speeding. He had a huge black suitcase in his back seat, saran wrapped shut. My uncle thought this was going to be one of the biggest busts of his career. He and the other officers took the suitcase out of the car, opened it up, and no drugs. The black suitcase was full of drugs. They spilled out everywhere, all different colors and shapes. The officers were laughing so hard that they didn't even want to give the guy a speeding ticket. The guy was so embarrassed. Story 17. Cops are super chill if you've got a solid reason for doing what you did. Ice cream lady flipped off my kid and another of the neighbor's kids. They told me, so I went and confronted her. Obviously lying, so I egged the crap out of her car while I was talking to her. She called the cops. One came and questioned me about it. I told him I egged her stuff and why I did it. He just kind of laughed and asked me to rinse her windshield off. Not all cops are bastards, my dudes. Story 18. I have a cool story about an ex-boyfriend and his crazy cop and criminal camaraderie. I've talked about him many times before on here, but most of those posts are now years old and buried under giant slabs of blather. He is brilliant, but super effed up. When he was in his early 20s, he got into meth, and then she blew. He ended up homeless, dumpster diving for food or sellable items or whatever. One day, he found a set of lockpicks in a little leather case. He immediately hit up the library, and through books and the library's free computers and internet, he set about teaching himself to pick locks. The thing about meth is it makes you incredibly single-minded, but this dude was also the type where, if he became interested in something, he dove deep into full-on obsession. He started spending all his time with locks. Then he started making keys. I don't know how many of you have had experience hanging around in dens, but he was the guy in the corner, bent over a Dremel for 2 days straight. Soon, no lock could keep him out. He still had his morals somewhat intact at this point, so armed with his new skill, he decided to go after parking meters. He figured that because paid parking was instituted in World War II to pay for the war effort, then never taken offline as promised by the various governments, he was stealing from the man. He soon branched out to vending machines and coin-operated laundry machines too, though that was a bit later. He would somehow steal a parking meter, either by bashing it over with a crappy car, then tossing it into the trunk and speeding off, or painstakingly hacksawing the metal pole. Some meters were just locked to the pole, so he would just pick that lock and make off with the head. He would then abscond with his prize to a secluded location, usually a flophouse, and set about copying the keyway. Because the meters in our town at the time only had 3 or 4 master keys, he soon had homemade keys to every single meter in the city. It was then as simple as rolling up to each meter on a street, opening it, pulling out the cup of change, dumping it into a heavy-duty duffel bag, putting it all back the way he found it, and moving on to the next. He was pulling in $3 to $4 grand every time he went out. He targeted private paid parking lots too, because to him, they were the worst of the worst. Those were the motherlode, because they had larger coins and bills in them. He soon became very popular. He would pay people to spot, block sightlines, and drive him around, and word got out. He was the man, because when you have several $1,000s every night, you're the life of the party. With this positive attention came the negative too. One story that comes to mind, there was this up-and-coming drug lord called the Fat Persian. Nationality changed for privacy reasons, from whom my ex scored from often. TFP was delighted with the way EBF, ex-boyfriend, was Robin Hooding around, sticking it to the man, and pulling in fat wads of pilf. Dollar signs flashed in my eyes. Or cents, anyway. So TFP came up with a plan. This particular night finds EBF at a flophouse, holding court in the corner with his drusty Dremel. Someone hands him a phone. On the other end is the urgent, sotto voice of a girl he knows. a girl who hung out at TFP's place a lot. "Get the hell out of there right now. They're on their way for you. You have maybe 5 minutes. Go!" Before EBF could ask any questions, she had already hung up. He handed back the phone, stuffed his stuff into his backpack, quietly peeked out the back door, and ran through backyards to get as far away as fast as possible. 4.5 minutes later, the door is kicked in, and men with baklavas and various weapons storm the place. It was a multi-level house, stuffed with people in various stages of tweaking and nodding, so it took a while to get everyone on the floor in one room, and realize that EBF was nowhere to be found. "Where the F is he? We don't know, he was just here minutes ago. Check that closet, check that bedroom, check the back shed." Their plan foiled, EBF's would-be kidnappers broke some stuff, hit a few terrified bystanders, and left. The plan was to abscond with the brain, take him to some dank basement, handcuff him to a radiator or what have you, shoot him up with speed 24/7, and force him to make keys until he could function no longer. Then, who knows? Dispose of him in some grisly fashion most likely. Later, when confronted over the phone, TFP was like, "Come on, buddy, you can't blame a guy for trying, can you? No hard feelings, right?" I digress. It was getting very real. The cops, the city, and the private parking companies were also doing the math and realizing that someone was ferreting into their dosh receptacles and getting away clean. After numerous arrests, near misses, and run-ins, the Baconators knew who their guy was. It was just a matter of catching him red-handed. The owner of one of the main monopolist private parking companies began staking out his own properties. He parked in his lots overnight every night for a month, waiting and watching. He always managed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd be in one lot, whilst EBF was in another across town, monkeying with his stuff, etc., etc. Finally, Parking Dude caught and apprehended EBF with his hand in the change jar, called the cops, and crowded with delight. Then, he probably slept the best sleep of his life, or at least since EBF began his reign of terror. Parking Dude couldn't deny the ingenuity and straight-up wiliness displayed by EBF, though, and had to hand it to the guy. Same with the cops. One cop in particular, the guy EBF had the most dealings with, was also gleefully flabbergasted by the on this kid. In the interrogation room, you'd have sworn the two were old buddies laughing over beers, reminiscing about the good old days. "So, that night we were chasing you and you disappeared? Where the F did you go? It's like you teleported away. You know that bush beside the house on Street and Avenue? I hid in there until you guys left." "No shit. We must have walked past that damn bush 20 times. Ha 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 ha." "Yeah, I was looking in my Batman underoos for sure." "Oh, check this out. This was the meeting I was at a few weeks ago with the mayor, chief of police, and parking commissioner." "Mayor, what are we gonna do about this kid with the keys?" "Parking commish. Well, we've already changed the locks on 30% of the meters." Police chief pulls out a ring with a bunch of janky homemade keys on it, selects a key, and holds it up. "You mean these locks?" Parking commish. "Oh, well, we have introduced a new virtually pick-proof lock in a few meters. We've only managed to install it on a few meters, but..." Picks another key from the ring and holds it up, eyebrows cocked. Parking commissioner goes, "I see. Well, there is another option." Police commissioner selects another 3 keys from the ring and fans them out. "Are you going to tell us about these new unbreachable locks now?" Mayor and Parcom in unison. "Mayor, are you guys going to get this guy or what?" "It was priceless. We were so pissed off. We were all certain the parking commissioner was going to get fired along with the rest of us." "That's so awesome." They ended up becoming friends, especially after EBF got out of the longest stretch of jail during that time, and decided to straighten up. When EBF got out, Parking Dude tracked him down and hired him as a security consultant. When that gig ended, he hired him on as a meter reader. That job was too hard for him to do from a moral perspective, though. Suddenly, he was working for the man, doing his bidding, and the cognitive dissonance was too much. He stayed clean for 8 years, and regularly met up with the cop for beers or coffee, and they always had a ball reminiscing about the good old bad old days. This was around the time he and I reconnected. We were street urchins together in our early teens. Or my early teens and his late teens. He was 4 years older than me. We got together, I cleaned up for my drug of choice, and we had a few happy years before it started to go sideways. He's not doing well at all these days, but I've managed to stay clean for 5 years as of yesterday. That's another story, though. And also somewhere far back in my post history. Let's just say things got spectacularly terrible for both of us. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed my secondhand not a cop, but story.